Continuing the discussion on the terms and concepts of Indian economy. All right, let us go ahead with different other terms. So, what are different types of inflation? So, based upon rate of increase, this inflation can be differentiated as creeping inflation, chronic inflation, galloping inflation, hyperinflation, running inflation. So this categorization is based upon a rate of increase in prices, rate of increase in prices or rate of increase in inflation. Alright. So based upon this rate of increase in inflation, it is categorized into different types. If we take creeping inflation, so creeping inflation is also known as mild inflation. It is also known as mild inflation, where the rise in prices is very slow, right? Where the rise in prices is very slow, and the rise in prices, that is the rate of inflation, is within 3% per annum. That is, the inflation rate is less than 3% annum. So simply, whenever the inflation rate is less than 3%, then we can call such inflation as creeping inflation or mild inflation. Alright. So this is one thing. Now coming to chronic inflation. So chronic inflation, because it is called as chronic because beyond this rate of inflation, that the inflation will have a disastrous effect on the economy. It is beyond chronic inflation, beyond the levels of chronic inflation, the inflation will have a disastrous effect on the economy. So whenever the inflation persists for a longer time, whenever inflation persists for a longer time, it is called as chronic inflation. Inflation where there are no signs of downturn, an inflation where there is no signs of any reduction, that is when there is a continuous or persistent increase in prices for a longer period of time, so without any signs of decrease, it is called as chronic inflation. So this chronic inflation, it starts beyond 10%. Now coming to what we call walking inflation or trotting inflation. So normally, if you take this trotting inflation, and sometimes we also call it as moderate inflation. It is also called as moderate inflation. It is called as moderate inflation. So if the inflation is between 3 to 10%, if the inflation is between 3 to 10%, it is called as moderate inflation or walking inflation or trotting inflation. Now coming to running inflation. So it is, from here we see the impact, the disastrous effect of inflation on economy. That is, so it is this running inflation which may be which can be termed as a chronic inflation. So where the rate of rise in prices is beyond 10%. So between 10 to 20%. If the rise in prices is between 10 to 20%, then such inflation is called as running inflation. So that means it is from this stage, it will be difficult for the governments, to control inflation. That means bringing down inflation is not that easy. And any kind of negligence, it may lead to triple digit inflation, which is called as galloping inflation. So galloping inflation, it is about inflation beyond 20%, and between 1000%. So simply it is double digit and triple digit inflation. It is double digit and triple digit inflation. Alright. So that is what galloping inflation is. It is galloping inflation. Alright. Now, so this galloping inflation is also called as jumping inflation. So we have seen walking inflation, running inflation and jumping inflation. Alright. 3 to 10%, 10 to 20%, 20 to 1000. So it is walking, it is running, it is galloping, and beyond 1000 it is called as hyperinflation. It is called as hyperinflation. So if you take this hyperinflation, when the inflation moves to 4 digits or 4-digit inflation, right? That is when there is inflation going beyond 1000%, it is called as hyperinflation. Alright. So at this level it is never possible for the government to bring down the inflation. That means if government want to act, or any act of government or any measures to control inflation, it should be taken when the inflation is less than 20%, right? If inflation crosses beyond 20%, right, it is highly difficult. It will be highly difficult for the governments to control the inflation, right? So this is the worst what you call inflation. In the worst case, right, the value of zero, the value of currency comes down to zero. That is the paper currency. The currency has no value. The currency, right, the currency notes, they are just like what you call waste papers. Alright, they don't have any value. The value of currency comes down to zero. Right, the money becomes, the paper money, the currency becomes worthless. The currency becomes worthless. Then that is, there won't be any value for currency notes. In such a condition, what will be done? Either it will be gold or silver. Gold or silver will be used for trading. Alright. So when the paper currency value comes down, when there is no value for paper currency, then it is obviously the gold will be used, or silver, or simply the older system of barter, exchange of goods. Alright. So one good is exchanged for the sake of other goods. Alright. So this will be done. Right. Normally, we are, right, in the recent past, this was seen in Zimbabwe. Right. It was in Zimbabwe where the inflation was beyond 3000%. Alright. So these are the different types of inflations based upon rate of increase. Right. So we have seen what you call creeping inflation, moderate inflation, creeping, chronic, moderate or walking, running, jumping. That is also called as galloping and hyperinflation.